Welcome to GalacticConnection.com, one of the most popular blogs on the World Wide Web today for alternative news. Stay tuned for the latest information on our world shift from enslavement to galactic involvement, as well as current intel on any blockages impeding us from our sovereign birthright. Knowledge and self-mastery are key at this time. Our commitment is to present you with the latest breaking conspiratorial articles, off-world messages, exopolitics, cutting-edge technologies and sciences, and also an ever-significant intertwining of spiritual support and metaphysical scope that one needs to dive down the rabbit hole in search for truth with balance. We are truly on the horizon of a new golden age filled with the promise for more love, worldwide peace, and accelerated intuitive skills, where every living being can exist in cohesion and abundance. It is whatever we envision and dream this new world to be. I say to you now, let's redefine the new world to the beginnings of our own precious heaven on earth. Galactic Connection is here to provide the pulse of Mother Earth through an eclectic range of interviews each Tuesday afternoon from 3 to 4:55 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Station 2 on BBS Radio, expanding your perspectives on how we can once and for all take back our freedoms, our joy, and our connection with our mighty I Am presence. Our intention remains true to connect hearts and minds everywhere in order to obtain global unity and galactic and universal acceptance. Our discussions will continue to cover anything to do with galactic society and our involvement with our galactic brothers and sisters. Our guests are experts in their fields, and our radio shows have been coined as some of the most thought-provoking out there. In addition to our daily blog, which runs 365 days a year, we also offer a realm of healing services such as our world-renowned implant removal processes, our spiritual past life clearings, our galactic violet ray alchemy from Alexandra, who shares in the lineage of Merlin, and other cutting-edge healing technologies. Check our site out at GalacticConnection.com now, sending you a wave of light, love, and inspiration, and a personal hug and thank you for listening to our Galactic Connection radio show and visiting our blog today. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alexandra Metters of GalacticConnection.com, and today is April 28th, 2017. I have with me Kevin Annett from itccs.org if you want to jump on and check out all of his news items and his books and all of the good information that he's sharing about how to not only bring down the Roman Empire, literally, through the Vatican, but also stop the relentless and ongoing child sacrifice, satanic ritual that continues to happen across the world. So Kevin really wanted to make a couple announcements today, and I know that one of the biggies that we have talked about so many times, Kevin, I'm excited to hear about, is the third exorcism.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow. When I read that, because we've talked about that. This is a huge event, is it not?
Oh, very much. And, you know, it's coinciding with Beltane. Kind of the background to this is that we received reports about a month ago that the Ninth Circle sacrificial cult operating within the Catholic Church was planning a big event. They were uniting all of their top people for the first time at 9 different events in different cities. And we posted this a few weeks ago at itccs.org, so people might be aware of this. But coinciding with that was the recognition that there's something big coming down. They don't do these numbers of child sacrifices unless it's coinciding with a big global event of some kind. And what we began to receive as well from different sources was that that shift we've all been talking about for a long time is happening. And that's one of the reasons they're employing this. But we are counter-responding on two fronts. We are sending teams into some of these sites to try to stop the rituals, just like we did in Montreal in 2014. But kind of on an etheric or spiritual level, there is a big linking up of spiritual elders all over the world that'll be happening on April 30th in a couple of days at midnight, the respective times, and really to blast them with this light, which can be seen and has been described as the third and final stage of the exorcism of the thing in Rome, responsible for all this. So I think, after April 30th, we're going to see a big shift in many ways.
I totally agree. I think that they are starting to feel the pinch. There's no question about it. And just so everyone's aware, Kevin does have that article up on itccs.org, but the locations are Rome, Montreal, Washington, D.C., London, Paris, Brussels, Geneva, Frankfurt, and Tara, Ireland, just so you guys have a heads up. Now, one of the other things that I immediately got a hit on was it said this is the biggest gathering they've ever seen. They weren't sure why all of a sudden there were people, officials and diplomats apparently coming in from Russia and China as well.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for me, what it feels like is they're losing their power. They're all getting together to try to rally up what has become a dwindling empire.
Yeah, to me it felt like my first impression was that image in a Western where the wagons are being circled, and they're being besieged. Definitely that's what's going on. It's funny because you don't, when you're working on the ground, you don't have a sense of this because a lot of people still seem to be in that old way of thinking of fear-based, people who we expected to be out there haven't been, and yet on another level, it's that none of that really matters anymore because it's really not ultimately in our hands. There's this great power acting through us, as I experienced in Rome in 2009 when I did the first exorcism there, and then Ratzinger announced his resignation soon afterwards. It's that. The awareness that there is a big shift happening, and I think this is just more proof of it.
So your second exorcism was when?
The next year, 2010.
2010, okay.
Yeah.
And then this is basically your third one.
There will be, yeah.
Are you going to actually do one physically? You probably would not be talking about that openly.
Well, I'm not going to share that part of it, but put it this way, in the first stage of an exorcism, you're naming the entity that's possessing the person. You're telling them by using them, forcing the name of who they are out, you take away their power. You're exposing them.
I just heard this from my last interview.
Yeah, well,
if you know the name of the actual demon, they lose all their power if you call out their name.
Well, that's right, because a name is it's a word from Hebrew that means the sign you hang on somebody to designate their status, either as a slave or somebody else. So it's the way into the source of the power of anything or anyone. And the second stage after naming and exposing it is you banish it. And we've certainly seen that. We've seen the collapse of these institutions happening all over. That's why the present Pope is doing this big disinfo distraction campaign. But the third stage is the replacement of the old entity with a new spirit, and that's what we see happening. If look globally, our body is going through a transformation, and this is really the third stage.
That's awesome. Now, I wanted to ask your opinion. I just pulled up this one article, and it got my attention. It was dated from the 26th, so we're talking 2 days ago, and it's talking about Pope Francis and his Council of Cardinals are meeting to continue discussing the reformation of the Roman Curia, focusing on the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples and the Pontifical Council promoting the new evangelization. Now get this, it says they will be discussing the interreligious dialogue, the Pontifical Council for Legislative Text, thought that was key, and the three courts. And I thought, since you're so knowledgeable about this, they talk about the first court is the Apostolic Penitentiary, which is similar to a tribunal in charge of cases involving excommunication and serious sins. Court 2, which is similar to a Supreme Court, and Court 3, which is akin to a Court of Appeals or a last instance court.
Well, all of that, what that's all about is, again, it's a defensive reaction to what's coming down. They call it a Reformation because October 31st is the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. And the Catholic Church is doing everything possible to get all of these churches back in the fold of Rome quickly, by any means necessary. They'll promise anything, they'll say anything, to let everybody think that, oh, well, you know, Rome has changed their spot somehow, which is absurd. But that's part of it. The other thing, of course, you notice behind all of this talk of change is always a way to solidify the power and the secrecy going on within Rome. So, for example, a few years ago when Bergoglio first became Bishop of Rome, he announced that he had a no-tolerance policy towards child abuse. So they're going to set up their own courts to investigate this. Well, all that does is hide the cases of child rape and that from public scrutiny. It keeps it within the church, which is totally controlled like they've always done. So you can make anything sound progressive if you use the right language, and Jesuits are notorious for that, of dissimulating and creating false appearances. But behind it all is the same thing we're seeing with the Ninth Circle, Alexandra, is that it's a desperate last measure to try to shore up the tottering power of Rome, and you're going to see it come down. You know, and they know it. It's like in a corporation that's in damage control. Everyone's worried about their pensions and their future prospects, and it's the same in Rome.
Well, and God knows, so many light workers out there have been doing a phenomenal job. We've been just all doing a lot of work to enhance this and bring it to fruition sooner rather than later. I know that everything is participating in this experience of bringing this down.
Yep.
The other thing I thought was interesting, why would the Pope refuse to wear a bulletproof vest when he went to Egypt?
Oh, it's part of the image. It's part of the image. Poor Francis wandered around the streets of Rome helping the poor like St. Francis of Assisi. They would never allow that if he was actually the Pope, any more than they would allow him to wander around outside the Vatican, to live outside the Vatican. He doesn't wear a papal ring. He's not the Pope. Ratzinger still holds the power. He's the puppet. He's the hand puppet everybody watches. You know.
I had a feeling that was what it had to do with. Yeah. And then the last thing was, I noticed that they're on a 10th week series on to what extent, ethically speaking, are sexual offenders responsible for their actions. There's a guy that's actually writing an entire series of articles, and it says here, sexual abuse is listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders as a mental disorder. It is true that offenders who commit abuse have mental disorders, and this plays a role in their crimes. For this reason, diseases offer psychological and spiritual care, both in those who have been abused as well as the offender. However, sexual abuse of minors is also an abuse of power, trust, and sexuality. And despite these disorders, offenders must be held accountable for their own actions. This is coming from the Vatican, from their own, this guy was hired to write this article for them. And in justice, there is mercy, and in mercy, there is justice.
Well, again, it's part of the whole thing. Catholic psychologists, for the last 5 or more years, have been working all over the world, especially in the States and England, to rewrite the DSM manual and the laws to decriminalize child rape and the sex with children. In fact, they are trying to bring in new laws that abolish all age of consent. Again, this is part of the assault on the human race. Start with the children, just like in the Indian genocide. You go after the children first. And so while the system is coming down, any system that's about to collapse gets especially vicious. If you look through history, and they strike out. And one example I've dealt with about that this week is there's only 2 therapists in Canada who recognize satanic ritual abuse and try to treat it. One of them is now under major attack. They're trying to take away her practice. Her name's Sandra Fecht.
Wow.
In Ontario. She's up before a review board. They're going to strip her of her practice unless she backtracks and starts to deny that SRA is actually a condition. They're trying to make it seem like people who believe in satanic ritual have a God obsession, are kind of mentally disordered, that there's no such thing. At the same time, one of her patients, Dave Steffen, who I had on my radio show last week, has identified 160 perpetrators in just a 50-mile area of central Canada. He had experience. He was raised in the cult. These are top professional people, politicians, lawyers, judges, and they're all part of the satanic ritual network that kills children. So the government is definitely stepping in to shut down any recognition and legitimizing of the whole thing of satanic ritual killing. So we can't be, too lackadaisical. We've got to keep aware that these things are still happening and they're going to intensify.
Yeah. And I do agree with you that there is the scenario of the cornered rat,
Yeah.
There's that feeling. I think we can actually feel it on the etheric plane. The other thing I wanted you to go over was just the Sovereign Common Law Assembly. I thought that was really cool. And clarify to people exactly what your proclamation reformation is all about, so we can remind people what it is you're calling forth.
Right. Well, that's kind of in reference to one of my latest books, Establishing the Reign of Natural Liberty. This is the common law training manual you can get on Amazon. And it's kind of on two levels. Let's talk kind of on a worldly and on a spiritual level. On the worldly level, we're talking about in the face of governments that by and large have become corporations. We're in a situation where a corporatized body has lost its sovereignty. That is, it doesn't have the right to impose its authority on anyone unless you're in a contractual relationship with it. So all the courts, the government now that have all been corporatized and privatized, none of us owe any allegiance to it, except to the extent to which we're fooled and think we have to. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do is establish a new jurisdiction. Since there isn't any lawful authority really anymore, we have to create that authority. Men and women covenant among each other to create a new common law jurisdiction, and we recreate society, if you like, recreate America from the grassroots using the common law. But common law itself is an extension of something else, which is they've got to be created by a sovereign assembly of people who reclaim their authority. So that's kind of on the political level, how these things, come about. But spiritually, there's a parallel process going on in that, we recognize, and you know better than I, the extent to which our souls have been trapped in this matrix and have been fed upon like cattle for so long. Now they're breaking free, but we need a new spiritual jurisdiction to operate under, if you like. And so there's kind of a mirror reflection of the two processes. But as we know, this world and the other world, they reflect each other. And so that's kind of in general what we're about. I mean, at a practical level, it means setting up within communities local sovereign assemblies. We've already started doing that in Canada and England and a few places in America, where people gather together, they form their own weekly assembly. They say, okay, here's the laws we want in our community. We don't recognize the existing authorities because they're arbitrary. They're often criminally run. And for one thing, we start monitoring our communities. We make sure the children are protected. People are banished if they're harming children. We take power right directly back into ourselves. Spiritually, people do that by walking away from these fallen churches, these fallen religions, and simply pulling your energy out from it. And simply withdrawing is enough to make it come down. So, that's kind of in general.
Especially if they become aware and they can wrap their brain around the fact that when they are physically participating in a mass, they're adding to the energy of what's going down below.
Absolutely.
If people really got that, they would never step foot in that place again. They
wouldn't, but you see, we recognize that people are in a state of spiritual possession, and that their minds are not their own, and they're thinking habitually, not consciously, just like the way people eat, right?
Very true.
So that's what's got to happen, and that's part of the exorcism process. It happens at a macro level, but it's happening within each side one of us as well.
Good point. Really good point. And just in fact, if you haven't caught his proclamation, I guess I should call it Protestant Reformation. there are three core statements. We, the people, call upon the people of the world to help us seize the killers and traffickers of children and arrest convicted church officers, priests, and others guilty of their crimes. That's number one. Number two, we, the people, call upon all people of true faith to leave the murderous Church of Rome and recovenant themselves into self-governing congregations without head, mediator, or priest, save that of Christ alone. And number three, we, the people, declare as accomplices in evil and accessories to crime all of those churches and their leaders that are seeking unity and reconciliation with the convicted genocidal Church of Rome. Man, you just don't screw around when you write. I just love it. Like the genocidal Church of Rome.
Well, it is. And, you know, it's really funny, Alexandra, because in my journeys, I've yet to find, I found one other person who's ever referred to the Vatican as a criminal body. People, he's a scholar who worked with some of the survivors of the Croatian genocide of the Serbs during the 1940s, where the Vatican, like in Canada, directly ran these concentration camps that were slaughtering about 1 million people with money directly out of the Vatican bank. And one of the scholars there said, well, they're a genocidal body, but everybody else is so hesitant to call a spade when it comes to the Church of Rome. It's part of the possession, the psychological control. And when you go outside of Western Europe and North America, you don't see that as much, where the Vatican hasn't had the history of sinking its roots into everything in society. But more, you know, the best responses we get are from other places in the world where people are outside that hegemony. So it's interesting, you know.
I bet. Well, tell us the latest on, you know, you were working on the radio show before. We sent something over to me. It was about this gentleman that is a whistleblower. I know you were just referencing to him, but there was something else that was just like a real bombshell that you had released on your radio show just recently.
This was, I'm trying to think back, because there's been a few of them. This was in relation to Rome, or? Well, I mean, we've had to be really careful, because if we let out too much, you're pre-warning the people. And
I agree.
But one of the things I can tell you is we had a whole initiative come out of Eastern Europe of groups now who want to convene in common law court because of one of the things I just described, which was the genocide organized out of Rome. A genocide which was completely concealed historically, because after World War II, the Vatican rat lines that brought so many Nazis into America and South America and that were organized through the Vatican. Pope Paul VI, he was one of the guys who did it. You know, and so the Croatian genocide was tied directly to the Vatican, so they wiped that out of the memory of people. But in fact, I've spoken to people who lived through that extermination, and they said it was so horrible what they were doing. They had special camps set up where only children were put, the children of Serbs, Roma, like Gypsy people, and the Jews. And they were killing off with methods that which are satanic in nature. Mm-hmm. That these satanic rituals were happening in all the death camps of Europe. Joseph Ratzinger was a member of not just the Ninth Circle, but something called the Knights of Darkness, which was an SS satanic circle. And so the thing about all of this genocide is its whole satanic element, which we're just beginning to bring out. And one of the people who is a source for us is the one who brought forth the document describing the 300-year-old history of the Ninth Circle, where it came from, how it was set up by the Jesuits, politically to blackmail and control people, but also at an etheric level to target and capture energy. Wow. And this is the whole thing. And what's interesting, as you probably know, is the CIA and others began to study this when the Nazis are brought over after the war. And one aspect of it was the MK Ultra mind control program, which we all know about. But beneath that was a recognition that since we're all energy, we can identify particular energy patterns. Let's say when you're courageous, or when you're afraid, or whatever, or you're operating from a very high place of integrity. Those are energy signals. And if you can capture them, and then use them as weapons, mm-hmm. That's exactly what the source of a lot of the satanic ritual was about when it interlocked with the military and the government. That's why so many high-powered people are involved in the Ninth Circle, because it's a way of capturing and controlling the energy pattern of the entire human race. And that's kind of part of the agenda that we're targeting and trying to break apart.
Well, to add to that, in one of my creator messages, what came through was the essence of those of light bodies of the Christ have been stolen.
Mm-hmm.
And they use that in these satanic rituals, and then we take the backlash for it.
Right.
And so that's been going on all day long, for a long, long time. So it's very similar to what you're saying,
right?
Just a different way of seeing it.
Right. Well, one of the reasons Sandra Feck, the counselor in Canada, is being targeted and is going to be shut down, they're going to try to shut her down, is because one of her things that she talks about publicly is how she believes that her clients have all been targeted in that way. Their souls have actually been taken from them and others have been inserted. And it's being developed to a fine art, a technology, like at a level of a weapon, to being able to do this to people. She stumbled across this, and not surprisingly, they came down on her like a ton of bricks. The legal community's lined up against her. She's getting smeared like any of us do. And she's being told she's going to lose her livelihood if she doesn't comply with this board. She has to meet before them on May 29th. But again, it's the same silencing of that truth.
Yeah. And it just shows you they're getting scared, aren't they, Kevin?
They are. I mean, it's a sign of a defensive reaction on their part. But, like I say, it's not a time for complacency or anything. Now is the time to push even harder.
I agree. And now talk to everybody a little bit. You've been a big advocate, especially with your new book, about coming up with common law arrest warrants as well as public cease and desist orders. Can you talk a little bit about that? And also, please, anybody who's listening to us, do not go out and try to do this on your own. Meaning, do not try to shut a satanic ritual ceremony down without serious assistance. Okay, do not do that. There's been a few that have, right, Kevin? And it was not.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, some of the major ones are protected by military and police. I mean, it's heavily protected. And a lot of them are held in sub-basement areas of Catholic cathedrals that you wouldn't even locate anyway. They're hidden. On the other hand, some of them are so overconfident. These people think they're God. And we've been able to catch them on a number of occasions because of the extent of their hubris and their sense that they are untouchable. So you got to be audacious, but also you got to use your brain. And we always do things in groups. And one of the things that we recognize is, and we found this out when we began to occupy Catholic cathedrals in Vancouver over 10 years ago about the Indian genocide, that when the police show up, you go and talk to them. And you say, we are committing a lawful act. You are defending a criminal body if you stop us from, confronting the church over these things. And in fact, we're deputizing you. We hand them forms that deputize them to either come under the authority of the common law or stand down. And we've never had a problem with the police. They always tend to back off. They don't know what to do, you see, because your average cop is worried about two things: the statute law he's been taught, which doesn't tell you anything about the real law and rights, and what his boss is going to say, the sergeant or the captain, whoever. And it's chain of command thinking. So these people are very vulnerable, and they are not the threat that people often think they are. Again, they appeal to fear to keep us backed off. But when even 5 or 10 people assert that authority, it's amazing what can happen. And so, I say to people, form the group, educate yourself, and then take action. It's amazing what you can achieve.
That's fantastic. Now, you're going around in the United States, I believe, and you're actually teaching this. Are you not? You're giving seminars on these.
Well, I don't want to say where I am at the moment, but we give training workshops. I give talks. we try to take people from the level of just coming out to learn about these things to an actual training workshop where they commit to being in a group. We try to keep the group small, between 3 and 5 people, because anything larger tends to get infiltrated and destroyed from within. We keep it at a cell group level. But that's good because, in The Art of War by Sun Tzu, he says you always have to act unpredictably towards a bigger enemy. So if you have all these small groups operating, they don't know where you're going to hit next. Whereas if you have a large group announcing what you're going to do, you can be immediately stopped. So there's advantage in our smallness, and we use that, all the time.
Yeah, and they're operating that way as well with all the multiple different kinds of factions and things. So why not?
Completely. Yeah. Yeah.
God, it's crazy. So tell me a little bit about what you're working on right now. Are you writing another book, or are you?
I'm
research, or
Well, it's really intense these days with all this stuff happening. So a lot of my time is spent with the groups all over the world, kind of working at a level of education and training, encouraging people. But just personally, I'm working on 2 new books. I'm writing a novel. And the other book is called Fallen. And it's a story about 4 of the Native men I knew in Vancouver who all died. And it's kind of like looking at their memory in the light of now Canada's attempt to flush that memory down the toilet, pretend genocide never happened, and pat everybody on the back and say, aren't we nice now? So Fallen is kind of a description of them, but also the state of a fallen culture that has to deny its own nature, the fact that it committed these crimes and still won't look at it. It's part of it is my therapy, it's just writing the stuff is a way for me to keep working through. And
isn't that what kind of got you all started in this, right? Isn't that really kind of what ignited you, was those 4 guys? I remember you talking to me about, wasn't there a priest that really left an impression on you?
Oh, in my book.
Yes.
In Unrelenting, which you can also get at Amazon. That was when I was in Chiapas, Mexico back in the 80s, and I was in a Mayan refugee camp. And this guy was a defraud Catholic priest who was killed eventually because he was challenging, I think, as a matter of fact, his bishop had him killed because the bishop was close to the landowners. And you often see that in the third world. A lot of the priests break off and side with the poor, and they're targeted by their own church, just like I was, right? But this guy really set an example of it. It's not about a church or a religion. It's about whether you're serving people and living the gospel, right? As Jesus described it, not as some pope described it. And so those people have been role models. But the thing about these 4 Native guys is that they were in a condition that is hard to describe. I mean, it's amazing they were drawing breath and walking around considering the torture they'd been through and were living through every day, living on the streets of Vancouver. But all 4 of them, and this is Ricky LaValle, William Coombs, Bingo Dawson, and Harry Wilson, these 4 guys were able to get up, talk about what had happened, lead protests, lead church occupations. They were the public figureheads, real survivors telling the truth. Naturally, they're all targeted, they're all killed. But their example reverberates, continues to, as all of ours do. And to me, it's an inspiration, but also a really poignant story about what it meant to lose them, what it meant to try to keep going after you'd lost the few people who were willing to stand by you. And that's a very hard thing to do.
Well, and on top of that, Kevin, everything else you've lost. You've, everything from when you started, when you were at the church, to the whole circumstance with your ex-wife and your 2 children. You've really paid your dues, is what I'm saying. You really know that story about how it's very difficult to keep people that are loyal around you. Because of
it's a funny thing. It's a really strange thing you have to learn about this world, is that there are no guarantees and there is no happy ending necessarily. The only thing you have to if you're thinking in terms of a reward or affirmation of some kind, the only thing you really have to keep going is the recognition that you've done what your conscience compelled you to do, and you did the right thing, and you've had an effect. And I have, and so that's what I have to remind myself every day, even though there's no obvious material or, compensation coming down in any way, but that doesn't matter to me anymore. I mean, it used to, during the painful times.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking for some hand to come reach out and help you, but in a way that thinking is part of our dependency, childhood dependency that we have to grow out of. And so I wouldn't change anything because it was a step I had to take. It was part of my purpose for being here and growing from it, which I've done.
And there's no bigger high than being here and fulfilling your own mission and purpose. Seriously. Absolutely. I mean, I'm speaking from testimony, folks.
Yep.
The other thing I was going to say was, can you clarify the Roman Curia? Clarify with everybody
what it is.
Yeah, what it is and why they're having these meetings about it. What's the big deal?
The Curia, it's from a Latin word meaning court, and the Curia is simply the College of Cardinals, who are the real power in Rome. Popes are figureheads. The College of Cardinals, and then an inner circle of 5 of them are really the ones who make and break everything. That term court is really important because a court is ultimately the decision-making body. So like, in America, we have this idea you've got the judicial branch, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and they're all separate somehow. We know that isn't true in practice, but it's all one in the original Roman model. So a court is seen as the body that ultimately makes decisions. Right. That has the power, like the Pope believes he has power of life and death over everyone on the planet. Amazing. That's their twisted thinking. It's called
he's infallible.
Oh, well, that was a silly thing that in 1870, when Garibaldi overthrew the Papal States, Pope Pius IX had declared, "Oh yeah, well, I'm infallible," and he just declared it. He didn't even consult the cardinals, so it's absurd. It's just a little political move on his part. But no, that thing about the Pope having power of life and death over everyone is called the magisterial privilege. And they really believe it because they've adopted the old Roman imperial idea that the emperor is God of heaven and earth. And it's just the Roman Empire again with a little cross on top of it. That's what you're dealing with. So
very interesting. And what's the latest on Ratzinger? Have you heard anything about him?
No. Very heavily shielded, which tells you something. We do know, that most of what people think they're getting out of the Vatican, they're not, because there's an amazing disinfo mechanism in place. And through the Vatican, it's called the Holy Alliance. That's their name for themselves. That's the espionage network that keeps everything secret in the Vatican. It's their assassination bureau. It's all that stuff. And they keep things pretty much under wraps. But in that sense, it's hard to know what to believe with the information you get out of the Vatican, right? But what we do know is that, there's more of a move you're hearing among Catholic Church, like in America, where it's really prominent. A lot of bishops now talking about separating, which is why, Bergoglio is trying desperately to make it one world church now, like one imperial power, because it's coming apart at the grassroots. And that's definitely undeniable now. You see that indication everywhere.
Yeah, I saw that. Oh my God. So, I mean, do you feel, I've always wanted to ask you this and I always forget. Princess Di was quoted as saying that when she was living with Charles, she said they're all a bunch of reptiles. She actually is quoted as saying that. This is way back. Has anyone come forth? Has there been any articles or any information on what these beings that run the cardinals of the Vatican look like, what they really are like? Has there been anything?
Well, no. I mean, anyone who even talks in those terms never reaches the so-called mainstream. They get immediately targeted and everything, which tells you something right there. You're not targeted unless you're stepping on something. I remember a few years ago, somebody asked Noam Chomsky why he hadn't been assassinated. And he said, well, because I've got a lot of privilege and I'm a white guy, so I'm protected. But the real answer was, he's not posing a threat to anybody. So they can let him talk all he want at an etheric academic level about these things. As long as he's just talking and not doing something, then he's not a threat. But the minute you say something and you get immediately counterattacked, it means, like, they just don't do that for no reason. It's because you're onto something. And I think in the case of, people call it different things, the reptilian race or whatever, it depends how much you read David Icke or all this other stuff. But whatever they are, and I don't even think it matters what you call them, they're a parasitic entity, and they're operating right around us all the time, and they mask and are able to camouflage their appearance. Some of us are able to see them, others not, but it's undeniable that that's at work. It explains a lot. And so I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Well, I think the reptilians are actually low on the totem pole, frankly. That's my opinion. But the other thing I wanted to point out to you is, when's the last time I interviewed you?
Oh, it must be months.
Okay. I noticed a significant difference between the articles today versus the articles when I interviewed you last, where there was just a smearing, and even on their own sites, there were the occasional article about sexual abuse and complaints about sexual allegations. There was none of that for the last several months. Nothing.
These are on what sites? On Oregon?
I can tell you right now. They're on Vatican.com. Let me see. Hold on. They're on news.va, Zenit, Catholic News Agency, and Catholic News.
Oh, you mean they buried any reference to child abuse? Well, naturally, they're in damage mode.
But that's the first time I've seen that. Usually you can find something about sexual allegations. So they must be really working hard to bury this stuff.
Well, they recognize that we've moved past talk to taking action.
Mm-hmm.
Performing citizen arrests on priests, going into the Ninth Circle sites, calling down the Vatican institution. Not just bad priests, but the whole basis of the thing. That's a revolutionary act, and it's the oldest corporate power on the planet. And naturally, when you say, okay, don't talk about anything, that's what a dictator does, or a general who's in retreat. You're worried about your own forces, so you have to gag everybody, right? You're afraid who might talk now.
I wanted to point out to you, so you have something going down on April 30th, correct? Where you
those are the disruptions of the Ninth Circle events and the exorcism rites.
Aren't you doing a meditation at midnight or not?
We're doing, I'm part of a whole circle that's involved in that, yeah.
Okay, so I would call forth, I'm going to put that out there right now, I would call forth all those workers of the light, okay, that you would step forth and hold the space so that this energy cannot be manipulated, and it cannot be stolen, and it cannot be used for something nefarious against humanity. This is why I don't support, by the way, Kevin, I do not blast world meditations. I've seen it with my own two eyes. I know what they do with the energy, and even though the people that are participating mean well, there are technologies and magic and things that are used to be able to manipulate where that energy goes.
Right.
So I would call forth anybody who can assist that. I already know several people that who can actually act as guardians to make sure that energy goes where it's supposed to go.
Good. No, I agree. And one of the things that we've asked people who are operating off the radar about this is the message to send to the entity causing these sacrificial killings is to stand down, is to simply back off. And, that in itself has got results. It's so anyway, I would ask that,
Okay, awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to cover today?
Well, that's the main stuff. I want to remind people of all my books. Just put my name on Kevin Annett at Amazon.com. You'll see all of them. Murder by Decree is a good, murderbydecree.com, where you can see a lot of the evidence of things we're referring to, but also in relation to genocide in Canada. whistleblower manual, and this recent one on the common law training manual. It's a very important resource. And again, if you want to contact me, thecommonland@gmail.com is the quickest way to reach me. And I will come and try to set up meetings in your neighborhood and anything else people want to do along these lines.
Right on. Well, maybe we'll hook up after all. We're like
maybe
passing in the night, you know.
Oh, but another thing too, remind everyone of our Radio Free Kanata blog radio show. That's 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, every Sunday. bbsradio.com/RadioFreeKanata, Kanata, Radio Free Kanata. And the archive is there. The show I mentioned about Dave Stephan, the Satanic ritual survivor, it's on last week. You can see all our shows archived on that site.
Well, thank him for stepping forward. That takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, he's an amazing man. This Sunday, of course, is the day. It's Beltane, April 30th. We'll be talking more about the stuff we went into today. And then in the weeks following, we'll have some good revelations.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for everything you do. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in again from galacticconnection.com. Please, if you are out there and you hear this interview and you feel that you have the capacity to hold this energy, and it's at midnight. Now, is that
That's right.
What time zone?
Well, a lot of them are happening midnight Greenwich time or an hour ahead of Greenwich, but it'll vary. You see, the satanic cults in America, for example, will, depending, the one in Washington, D.C. will be at midnight Eastern time, so it'll vary, but, you know, no doubt in your area there will be one. So, pardon?
So they were going to be coordinating across the world at their same time.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, everyone. So stick to your guns, stand in your truth. Know that you're the authority of your own world, not them. And we are at the final gate here. This is a big deal. Kevin's he's been talking to me for years about this. The third so-called exorcism and the anointing of those that stand for the truth. And what better than to really protect the most precious, beautiful beings, which is our children. So anyway, thank you very much, Kevin. And,
Thank you.
And stay tuned. Hang in there. I want to talk to you for a second. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Lots of love.